to the Foreign Correspondents Club. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. Great pleasure to have you here. My name is Tim Huxley. I am the second Vice President of the FCC. For our welcome today's guest, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Please make sure all your mobiles and everything are turned off. Please do keep an eye on the FCC website for upcoming future events. It's great that we're back and getting these lunches going again. Yet after our first event a couple of weeks ago, we're keeping with the sporting theme, but this is the most important sporting news and event really in Hong Kong for many years. Today we're delighted to welcome Dr. Trisha Leahy, the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Sports Institute, who oversees Hong Kong's elite sports system, which has just enjoyed its most successful Olympics ever. Dr. Leahy has previously worked for the Australian Institute of Sport prior to joining the Hong Kong Sports Institute, where in addition to her role as CEO, she has served on the government's Women's Commission and Equal Opportunities Commission, as well as undertaking a number of positions on international commissions with UNICEF and the IOC. Please, can we give a very warm welcome to Dr. Leahy. Trisha.
Thank you all for coming. Okay, I also have this mic, is that okay? I'm very happy to see so many of you here, and so many old friends as well. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the backstory. You may have seen on the media, heard some interviews I did on the media, people asking me, oh, it's so surprising, the results are so surprising. But of course, if the results were really so surprising, then I should be fired immediately because it's our job to produce these results. So if we don't know what's going on and can't predict what's going to happen, then we're all in trouble. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit about what it is that we do in Hong Kong, how we run the elite sports system, and how the timing has worked out at this particular point in time. So the athletes had some of their best results. So basically, I'm going to be talking about a systems-based approach to the generation of medal-winning athletes. When we talk about a system, we're really referring to a set of practices, infrastructures that most contemporary elite sports systems are already operating. And without that kind of systems approach, I think it's very hard to have sustained success on the world stage at any level, let alone at the Olympic level. So when we talk about systems approach, we're really looking at issues like macro factors, meso factors, and micro factors. And I want to, each element of these factors really is going to form the fundamental elements of the system from which you derive your critical success factors. Now, not all of these factors are immediately amenable to strategic manipulation, so we have to choose the factors carefully. Now, obviously, macro level factors are going to impact on high performance success. But macro-level factors are not something that you can really manipulate very well. So your population size, for example, is not something that's amenable to government policy change. Your physiological profile, the physique of the population that you're working with, is also not immediately amenable to specific adjustments. Things like the GDP, things like the Human Development Index, all of these have been associated with successful elite sports systems. And so some of those we simply can't compete with. Then I'm going to jump you down to the micro-level factors. When we talk about micro-level factors, we're really referring to within the athlete's own environment, the kind of family support that the athlete might have, the self-motivation of the athletes. And all of these are very important, don't get me wrong. But in and of themselves, they are insufficient to form the kind of systemic value chain that's going to lead to high performance results on the world stage. So what we're really looking at is the meso-level factors. So meso-level factors definitely are amenable to strategic input, particularly from government. So government policy becomes really important at this end. And from the meso-level factors, we can look at things like funding, high-performance facilities, educational support, clear pathways for athletes in, through, and out of the system, funding for athletes. So all of these areas at the meso level, this is what's going to make the difference to a successful outcome. Now, as we look around the world, I think what's becoming very obvious from some of the international benchmarking research that we see is that there's a convergence of the kind of systems in successful countries. So everyone is doing pretty much the same thing. We all have the same fundamental elements in the system. So what seems to be making the difference is not simply having a system in and of itself, but rather how you manipulate that system and how you make it culturally specific for the environment in which the athletes are living. That seems to be the key to delivering the outcomes that we're all looking for on the world stage. So at the Hong Kong Sports Institute, then, we are the government's delivery agent of the whole high-performance system. So we have about 20 what we call Tier A sports. So those sports are fully residential on the Hong Kong SI campus. We have the world standard training environments for them. We provide the coaching, all of the science, the medicine, all the backup support that they need. So that's about 1,300 athletes. Similarly, the para sports who are currently competing at the Paralympic Games, there are 6 of those at the Tier A level, fully residential. And then we also have other levels that we provide funding only to, depending on how they've come on international results. So at Hong Kong SI, the choice of which sports come under our ambit is not made by us. That's a government policy decision. So the Sports Commission, which is the advisory body which advises the government on its policy, comes up with the criteria in communication, obviously, with the stakeholders. So there's a set of criteria, and sports need to meet those benchmarks before they can come into the Institute and take advantage of what we're doing. So that's why you'll see we have 20 sports, but some sports are not included in that. All of the Olympics medalists, of course, were part of those 20 sports and are training full-time at the Institute. So then to give you a flavor of the Hong Kong SI specific system, if you like, our iteration of optimizing the value chain. Right at the center of our system, we have the athletes. Now, around the athletes are a series of factors that we see as directly impacting on athletes' results. So that's the circle that you see there. For us, those are the critical success factors. So when we're looking at our funding, which is about 800 million a year, we always guarantee to the government that at least 70% of that funding is going on these critical success factors. So that means your high-performance coaching, your science, medicine, technology, venues, access to overseas competition, educational support for the athletes, direct financial support for the athletes. So the athletes come into a very secure system that takes care not only of their sports development, but also takes care of their holistic personal development. And the reason we have this multifactorial system is that bounding our system is a framework or a paradigm which comes really from behavioral medicine. We call it the biopsychosocial pathway of development. So the biopsychosocial model effectively says that the development of an elite athlete onto the world stage is a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors. So the biology is, how you can develop your physique, your abilities, your motor skills. The psychology is the internal motivation, desire, willingness of the athlete to be able to go through all of the challenges that are required for high-performance sport. And then the social factor, this is our not only family, but community, how our society values sport, how the education policy supports athletes' education. So these are all the social factors. So when we look at developing athletes onto the world stage, these are the critical success factors. Outside of that is everything else, our fundraising, our communication systems, our chief executives. So we always say to the government, look, if it ever comes to the time when you don't have enough money, you can get rid of your senior executive staff, but you can't get rid of your coaching. You can't get rid of your scientific and medical staff, because those are the key to the athlete's development. So that's essentially what our system looks like, and that's why it costs so much. And some of the questions we've been asked recently, are how do you apportion funding between the sports? And here's the answer. We apportion funding according to these critical success factors. So every sport will have a different iteration, if you like, of these factors in terms of which is more or less important. Some sports are equipment heavy, some sports are not. Some sports are technology heavy, some sports are less so. So it really depends on the sport. So then as we look to measuring outcome, of course, the most easily measurable outcome is the medals on the world stage. This is Jiang Galong, who won the gold medal in fencing. But when we look at international benchmarking, in the modern day Olympics, 75% of the National Olympic Committees attending the Olympics have never won a gold medal. 60% of them have never won any medal at all. And 45% of them have never even reached the top 8. So you can see how, when you put into perspective Hong Kong's results, even stemming back from 1996 when San won the gold medal, Hong Kong is not doing too badly for a city with a population of only 7 million. So really, it's all down to this development of a system. And now back to the question of, well, how come we were not surprised at the results? Well, we're not surprised because we're constantly tracking athletes' results. So if you look at, on my chart here, starting from, this is a 4-year cycle. I'm representing a 4-year Olympic cycle to here, from 2008 up to 12, 13, and up to the current Olympic cycle. So if you look at all of these results, starting from the bottom rung of the ladder, Asian Championship junior medals, Asian Championship senior medals, then World Champs junior and senior, you can see we're always on an upgoing trend. Now, this is important. Why is this important? It's important because when we look at the data on Olympic medalists, in the 2 years before the Olympics, if you're not in the world top 3, you basically have a very low probability of winning a medal. If you're in the world top 3, then you have an 80% chance of being one of the medalists. So this is what we're looking at all the time. What does the data say about where we are on the world stage? And then we use some big data analysis to have a look at every single athlete that we're competing against in every single competition around the world. And you get a ranking from that data so you can see who's maintaining in the top 3, who's maintaining in the top 5. So we're always looking at that data, as well as the professional coaching judgments about where the athletes, what are they likely to be able to achieve. So all of these past Olympic cycles, we've been able to maintain at least 55% of the sports, 11 sports of our 20, who are World Championship medalists. So Hong Kong is doing very well. Therefore, it's not surprising that when it comes to the Olympics, they're doing even better. However, this is what we all faced with. So all of our data, in a sense, suddenly got thrown into disarray when COVID hit. Because suddenly there were no competitions, there was no access to overseas competitions, so everybody was suddenly stuck in a situation of unknowns. So for us at the time, our mission critical was really to preserve, regardless of, we didn't know if the Olympics was going to happen or not, but our mission critical was, regardless, preserve the Olympic and Paralympic preparation until such time as somebody says it's definitely not happening. So we kept going as if. And our risk management strategy was just founded on that critical mission. The problem for us and for everyone else is that the levers of primary action of any risk management strategy were not under our control because nobody knew what was going on. So we were totally dependent on getting the information from government. So our risk management strategy was a kind of iterative, cyclical strategy of adapting to information from government advisories, adjusting, making sure we had a coordinated rapid response, implementing new procedures, and then constant evaluation and measurement. So what those procedures were, basically, under the public health ordinance, when everything shut down in the community, all the sports centers shut down, we would also have had to shut down, except we were able to prove to the government that we could set up a biosecure training environment for the athletes. So basically that involved the athletes, their coaches, the scientific and medical staff, living on site for periods of time, not allowed to leave. Not an easy ask, let me tell you. You know, living in an institute environment can be boring. There's no minibar, etc. You know, the food is high-performance food. It's not nice food like we have here today. So we had to implement this closed camp training. We did that 3 times during the past year. Altogether, I think it was around 174 days of closed camp training for the athletes, so not easy. Then, of course, we had to prove to the government that our health and hygiene measures were sufficient to reduce the risk on site. So we had weekly testing, we had venue management in terms of cleaning the venues, air exchange. Every time the athletes used a venue, it was again cleaned. And we had testing, weekly testing. And then we also, when the vaccines got ready, we had a vaccination program, thanks to the government, on site at the institute, so it was really convenient for everyone. So consequently, all of the Olympic athletes were vaccinated, almost 100% of the coaches were vaccinated. Currently, we have about, I think, 75% of staff are vaccinated. Get vaccinated. It's very important. So I think the other challenge we faced then was getting the athletes out of Hong Kong into international competitions where they needed to get qualification points. So we were constantly assessing, how are they going to get there? How do we set up a biosecure travel bubble? What's the bubble like at the competition? How important is that competition? How are we going to get them back? And then once they're back, how are we going to manage quarantine? Because they can't stop training for 3 weeks. So again, we worked very closely with the government and with our medical panels to set up the biosecure travel environment. When they came back, we were able to set up a biosecure travel bubble to get from the quarantine hotel into an isolated training venue where they could keep training and then go back to the quarantine hotel. So really, without that kind of, I think, multi-sectoral support from government, from LCSD, there's no way we would have been able to properly prepare for the Olympics at this time. So that was the major challenge. Now as we go forward, we're looking at what are the next challenges. I think one of the primary challenges that we see is that the junior development, I think, has been really hit by COVID. All throughout the last year, for most of the year, we only had the full-time athletes allowed in for training. So that means part-time athletes, junior athletes had no access to training because we were trying to keep the biosecurity of the whole environment for the Olympics. So that, on top of the fact that we have a declining demographic in the young population, and on top of the fact that we really face a challenge of relevance to young people, because being a high-performance athlete is not an easy path to choose. There are other much more attractive pathways for young people. So how do we remain relevant to young people so the next future stars can come about? That's something that we've got to deal with, as well as the long-term impact on the junior athlete development from COVID. And that's something that many other countries are dealing with as well, not just us. So as we move forward into the next 5 years, for us, the Olympics is not a stop. It's a moving program. The next Olympics is in 3 years' time. Currently, we have athletes at the China National Games. 2022, we have the Asian Games. And don't forget 2022, also the Gay Games, Dennis. So make sure you support the Gay Games. That's going to be an amazing community event. So we have, for the elite athletes, we have the Asian Games, and then we have Paris coming up, Paris Olympics, and then again, we're back into 2025, the Greater Bay Area, including Hong Kong, Macau, and Guangzhou, the national games. That's going to be super, super motivating for everyone, I think, in Hong Kong. So if we look at what we're doing, and again, thanks to the government support, we're getting almost $1 billion to build a new building that we've been planning for the last 2 years, and it's been moving very slowly. And now suddenly, because of the results, it's moving very quickly. So that's fantastic. So that'll be ready in 2024. We're also, the government set aside $300 million for us to really boost our investment into technology and science, which we see are key components of the success that we've just had, as well as future success going forward. You know, we're all looking for marginal gains. And marginal gains, by definition, cannot be seen with the eye. So we're often looking at, scientific data, machines to measure more precisely what's going on inside the body, outside the body. So that aspect for us is very important. And we were really happy also that the chief executive came out in support of what we've been pushing for a long time, which is the dual career path that athletes need at the university level, and UGC is very, very supportive. They've been providing at least some kind of flexible access for athletes. Now, the next step going forward to deepen and strengthen that, what we really want is for them to allow athletes access to the universities, even though they may marginally miss the minimum requirements. And of course, the reason they're missing the minimum requirements is not because of some academic deficit, but rather because they're spending their time training, representing Hong Kong, traveling overseas, and for the good of Hong Kong. So there should be some give and take in terms of the minimum entry requirements. So that's moving forward in a very positive direction, and we're very grateful to the chairman of the UGC, Carlson Tong, who's very supportive of this as well. Then the other area, which is the junior athletes and the feeder system that I mentioned that we really need to look at more carefully, is in the school support. Because by the time an athlete is around 16, then it's time to start thinking about really quite specific full-time training. So to date, we have a partnership program with a local school called the Lam Dai Phai College and with the ESF systems. So they provide flexible education for the senior secondary school athletes, allowing them to still train full-time, get access to their education in a flexible way. So we need to keep deepening and strengthening that. And then finally, the new concept of the government right now to push is the idea of sport as an industry and professionalizing sport. And I think that that will benefit everyone. So funding is put into that. The whole professionalization of coaching, of the national sports associations, of how we run venues, all of that. And with the Kai Tak Sports Park coming online in 2023, it's a very exciting time to be involved in sport. So let me stop here so that I can give you time to ask me the questions you really want to ask, now that I said things that I wanted to say. And ask me anything you like. I'm very open to hear your questions.
Thank you, Trisha.
You're welcome.
Come and have a seat.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, because you're consuming food and drink, so let's
Oh, okay.
just take
It's
a sip
so
of that.
hot up there with your mask on. Oh my goodness.
Trisha, thank you very much. That was absolutely enlightening. Now we're going to sort of throw everything open to the floor. And if I can just start by asking, our medal winners have come back.
Yeah.
I mean, great performance, life-changing for them. They become celebrities in Hong Kong, and they must be being pulled in all sorts of directions, being offered lots of opportunities,
Yeah.
some good, some bad. How do you guide them?
Okay, it's a good question. A lot of these athletes were very well known anyway, prior to obviously their Olympic results, so they're not unknown entities. So they already have a very high profile. Some of them have their own managers, so it's a very professional setup that some of them have. So what we do, again, and working with the government in terms of accessing sponsorship to get awards for the athletes, guiding them through contracts, and guiding them through the kinds of things they should accept and not accept. So this is a combination process of us working with the athletes, with the associations, with the Olympic Committee, because we all have to agree, make sure there's no conflict of sponsorship rights, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not an easy process. And also, I mean, right now, remember, that is a wave. So the athletes are riding that wave right now, and quite rightly, they should optimize their opportunities. But that wave, will die down eventually, and then, we're some of them already back in training. So it's back to the drawing board. And yes, absolutely.
Any questions from the floor? Yes, we'll bring a microphone over to you. If you can just announce who you are and then fire away, please.
Hi, Jacinta Redden. Thank you very much and congratulations. It's been a wonderful... I'm not going to put my mask on just to ask the question. Thank you. Congratulations. It's been a really proud moment for Hong Kong. And pardon me if this is an ignorant question, but I'm really curious about to what extent these world-class facilities that the Institute has, to what extent is there support, cooperation, involvement of mainland Chinese athletes? And how do you manage that? Because you have Hong Kong athletes competing against mainland athletes. Do mainland athletes and coaches use those facilities?
Okay, so our facilities at the Institute are for training the Hong Kong athletes, obviously, number one. But we have a significant number of institutional level relationships with China and with our counterparts in China, which is really a great help for our athletes. So, for example, we often have the China national cycling team training together with our athletes, and we send our athletes into China to train together with the teams there. So we have a very close collaboration, and it's very positive and it's very helpful. And even to the level of the Sports Administration Bureau, who are also very supportive and wanting Hong Kong to do really well. And I think the National Games in 2025, going to be in Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Macau, is a very practical example of that. So we see everything moving forward in a very positive way. So yeah, for us, it's just very normal. We're always in and out of China, apart from the COVID situation, yeah. And they're always in and out of the Institute as well.
Next question.
Hi, thanks. Elaine Pickering here. So a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, fencing. I can understand table tennis, badminton, but how did fencing become an elite sport that we're so good at in Hong Kong? What's the history behind that? And secondly, we're riding on a wave now. It's been fantastic. I don't think I've ever watched so much Olympics in my life. Your plans are long-term, but how do we keep the momentum going? Given that people get distracted by other things very quickly, move on to other things. How do we keep that going? Or how can you keep this going so we keep riding the wave about sports development?
Thank you. Good question. Let me ask the second one first. I think that in Hong Kong, what I would really like to see is more English language media coverage, because the Chinese media is very saturated with coverage of athletes. It's great. It's very supportive. So in a sense, in the local press, everybody knows these athletes. It's not something new. So that's not the issue in terms of riding that wave that will go on. The media are very supportive. So I'd really like to see more English language coverage, which I've been complaining about for years, because I often have friends say to me, "Oh, Hong Kong has an Olympic team," because you never see it in the English language press, right? So that's not okay. So definitely, these results are the result of the system that we've been building up over the last 8 to 12 years. It takes 8 to 12 years to bring an athlete to a medal-winning position on the Olympics. So as we move, every year we're looking at our 5-year strategic plan, annual plan, KPIs, moving everything forward. So it's not because now we've had, finally getting good results at the Olympics. We're not just suddenly now starting, how are we going to do this? This is a path that we're already on, and we're going to keep going. And then fencing. Fencing has been very successful in sport in Hong Kong for a long, long time. But again, back to, the English language media coverage. You'd never know about it. They had amazing results at the last Asian Games. I mean, Zheng Galong, who won the gold medal, he's already been a previous world champion. So, he didn't suddenly come out of nowhere. So, yeah, again, the narrative needs to be picked up in English language press for everyone to be able to know about how great these people are and what a superb job the coaching teams and the science teams and the medicine teams behind them are all doing.
Not often we have somebody coming and telling the media, pull their finger out. Thanks very much. Anything? Yes, at the back there, please.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on the results. Absolutely spectacular. The systems approach is obviously working. So well done. My question is, you've got 20, I guess, elite sports in there. So how do you deal with, I think there's about 55 NSAs or something in Hong Kong. How do you deal with these groups, and specifically the groups, the NSAs that are either uncooperative or just really apathetic to sports development in Hong Kong?
Okay, so I think under the policy system, I think one of the advantages in Hong Kong that we have is we have kind of clear delineation between agencies working in the different aspect of sports. Our collaboration most closely will be with the National Sports Associations under our ambit and with the Olympic Committee. Now, we also have, as well as the 20 Tier A who get everything on site, there are 13 Tier B sports who get funding only. So then we collaborate with them in the sense of giving them access to the funding and doing marginal assessments on what they're doing with the money, making sure the accounting is okay. And then apart from that, then there's another level of funding for the team sports, because the government policy is that they want to bring up the team sports. So that's also a separate program. And we're marginally involved in that program as well in terms of some of the administration and assistance. Similarly with the Paralympic sports, there are, as I said, 6 Tier A and there's 3 Tier B. So again, they're funding only. And then what happens if you have an extraordinary athlete who suddenly comes from somewhere and the NSA is not quite caught up? Then we also have a funding and access to the institute for that particular athlete if they meet benchmarks. So basically we have a kind of a matrix approach in Hong Kong under the current system. So we try not to lose anyone between the cracks who may have the talent to be developed. But definitely the role of the National Sporting Associations is absolutely crucial. And so those associations, with successful results, time after time after time, whether it's Olympics or Asian Games or squash or whatever, these are really, really sophisticated NSAs, very professionalized bodies, and they're the ones getting the results.
Lady in the corner there, thanks.
Hi, Edith Terry. Thank you so much for everything you've done for sports in Hong Kong. It's incredibly impressive. So I have 2 questions. One is, I think many of us who are runners or swimmers or cyclists have the impression that Hong Kong at the policy level is not supportive. I believe that's where the last question came from. How do you change that? You mentioned community involvement. Then my second question is, what's your talent scouting like? Talent scouting, especially at that junior level. How do you look for, identify, and then, sort of prize out young talent?
Okay, thank you for those questions. So the first one was about policy. On the contrary, I think sport policy in Hong Kong is very supportive. So sport policy in Hong Kong has 3 prongs. The community sport, they want to develop sport to be a very strong cultural sporting environment. And then there's the major events, which is basically trying to attract major events to Hong Kong. So they want Hong Kong to be a sports hub. So all of the funding into the Kai Tak Sports Park and the 2025 National Games, that's all part of that policy implementation. And then the elite sports sector, they want Hong Kong to be successful at the elite sport. So again, in terms of putting the money where the mouth is, we can't complain that at the elite sports level, there's certainly sufficient funding for what we want to do. It's been very supportive, and we hope that will keep getting better as we move forward. So I'm of the view that sports policy in Hong Kong is much more integrated and supportive than what I've seen in other places, where it's much more truncated, and there's a lot of conflict between community sport and elite sport because there isn't enough money for both, and there's always this conflict. We're lucky that we don't have that situation in Hong Kong. What we do have in Hong Kong is the spatial limitations of the geography. So then that's a challenge, I think, at the community level for access to venues and places where young people can train and develop. So then that leads to the next question, which is then how about talent scouting? Talent scouting is a notoriously weak way of looking for talent, so that's not what we do. Basically, we work with the NSAs, and the NSAs have their own development system and series of competitions at various levels that athletes can access on their way up. And then when they're ready, the NSA will recommend those athletes to us, or we can intervene in the pathway on the way up and do some scientific testing, measurement, jumping, levers, who's suitable for what sport. So it's a kind of a combined program. So once we identify with the NSA these younger athletes, we then give them a kind of an inculcation program of, if you come in as an elite athlete, even though you're very young, what can you expect? What's the basic psychology around competing? What's the basic strength and conditioning things that you're going to need to be doing? How do you get on with your teammates? All that kind of thing. So we try to do some of that to add value to the NSA. So the Institute, as an organization, talent scouting is not our job. That's the job of the NSAs. So we work with them to add value wherever we can. Then our job is to take that talent and bring it onto the world stage.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
just opposite Edith. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sally Dello. I should declare an interest. My partner is a coach at SI, a cycling coach.
Oh.
And I'm super interested in... I'm not an athlete, let's be clear. So I get to hear some of, the insight, the story. And because he was a head coach in France and in Kazakhstan previously, he lives in this world of comparative coaching development. And that's what I'm interested in building on. Edith, you talked about a pathway through. And I think that's so important, particularly if we are looking at sports as industry and so on, that
Correct.
athletes have a pathway to stay in sport as a profession. And I'm wondering how that's done, because I know in cycling there has been a lot of phenomenal talent. Wong Kam-po with Jung Kim-wai, both of whom coached and then didn't coach anymore. And I just wonder how the Sports Institute ensures that we don't lose our talent when their days as an athlete ends.
Yeah. Now, I think we look at it like this. As the athletes are going through the Institute, we provide them with funding and access to education opportunities so that they can prepare themselves for the next step. It's a mistake to think that every athlete wants to be a coach, because they don't. So those athletes who do want to go down the coaching track, we have what we call a coaching apprenticeship program for them. So when they're in their last year and a half, they can start detraining in a sense, so start training part-time, and then they are mentored by the head coach with a specific set of skills to build up their coaching knowledge. And at the same time, we put them in coaching certification programs. So for the athletes who do want to become coaches, there's certainly a pathway. We also have a collaboration with the Beijing Sports University, who provides a degree program part-time. And this is in coaching education, not coach education, it's in coaching science. So All of those options are available to athletes. But don't forget, high-performance coaching is not an easy job. You're traveling a lot of the time. You don't get to spend a lot of time with your family, as I'm sure you well know. You're constantly 24/7. You're interacting with multiple teams of, scientists, doctors, psychologists, nutritionists. Everybody, has something to do with the athlete. So it's not an easy job, not suitable for everyone. So sometimes we find young people going into coaching without the expectation or the knowledge of what it's really going to be like, and they find that, okay, that's not suitable for them, and that's okay. We're happy to have given them the opportunity, because for everyone who doesn't want to do coaching, you will have somebody who does. So in a sense, it's part of the training and the learning environment that athletes, as they're moving on to something else. The most important thing that we can do, I think, is provide them the opportunity and let them try it out. And if they don't like it, that's okay. Then there are other options for them to move into.
In the corner here.
That's great. Hi, Trisha. How are you doing?
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
This is Elaine Orris from Asia Sports Tech. And had a two-part question here. The first one was, you were just at the Olympics, which were incredible. And again, congratulations. It's been really successful. And really gave Hong Kong a much, much needed lift. I mean, you could literally see the energy in this city go to another level. It was fantastic.
I agree, it was great.
Again, thank you to you and everyone you work with, and of course the athletes. So the question, two-part question.
Yeah.
First one was, what you talked about the everyone looking for those advantages when they're competing head-to-head in the different systems and what have you. So what technologies did you see as having the most impact at this Olympics, this first part? And then the second part is, what type of technologies would help most of the Sports Institute and as well throughout advancing sports in Hong Kong?
I mean, these are great questions. And first of all, I want to say, really, thanks to the government for buying the broadcasting rights. Because even for us, we generally, this time we weren't able to go because of the COVID restrictions. But generally, we go out to the Olympic venues and we might see, 2 or 3 competitions, and then, time's up, you got to get back. But this time we were able to watch every single competition like everyone else. So it was fantastic for us as well as for the community. We loved it. Yeah, technology, back to this question. Yeah, the whole science of biomechanics, technology, material science cuts across everything from what the athletes are wearing. We have micro-technologies, in thermometers that they have to eat so we can see what the internal, I won't give you the details, the internal body temperature is doing, and all sorts of equipment measuring, calibration, et cetera, et cetera. One of the major projects we did this time was with UST, and this was sponsored by Adam Kwok of Sun Hung Gay Properties. So it was a great project because UST has an amazing wind tunnel, and the professor in charge of it used to work in Formula One racing. So he's really got the whole computational fluid dynamics thing down. So it was absolutely amazing for us to be able to go in and microanalyze where the marginal gains would come for the track cycling, which included also an analysis of Champion Systems was doing the uniform, an analysis of how we could structure her uniform to optimize the speed and the aerodynamic ways of moving forward. So that was a major one that we did. Then lots of other projects, micro, mid and large projects that we're doing as well. Some of them top secret that I can't share with you.
Yes, down at the front.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Trevor Smith. Full disclosure, I am an executive coach. And I wonder whether, 2 questions. One is, would you enter the Olympics without a coach? Or is it possible these days? And secondly, given all the fantastic support, what's the separation between being a professional and an amateur these days?
Okay. Would you enter the Olympics without a coach? I think that would be very difficult to, in general, enter the Olympics without some kind of system behind you. I think it would be almost impossible in today's world, apart from wildcard entries, but even then you still have to meet basic requirements. The second question was, say it again? Oh, the professional amateur. That's no longer a relevant question. The lines have been blurred in that for so long that it's just simply not an issue anymore. So if you're going to be at the Olympics and succeed and do well, you absolutely, are a professional in the sense of having a professional mindset. This is your full-time professional job, and you have a system and some kind of funding behind you. Otherwise, you're really not going anywhere. Now, even some of our, similar to basketball or golf, they have their professional leagues as well. Same with badminton, table tennis. They have super leagues, professional leagues that they're all competing in, as well as competing for Hong Kong in terms of Olympics. Yeah, so really is quite meshed now. It's no longer, in a sense, it's no longer a question that we ask.
One further question. Elaine?
So, I watch a lot of football, and they say that the supporters are, can be the 12th player. To what extent do you think that not having any spectators at the Olympics affected the players? I mean, I was wondering, because as Hong Kong sports people, we probably don't have as many people there as, say, the Americans, the Australians, or whatever, who create a lot of environment for their players. Did that make any difference to the results, do you think?
I think it really depends on the sport and how we prepared for that, because everyone knew that was going to be the likely outcome. So then it's simply a question of how, as you're preparing towards the Olympics, you're preparing your athletes to meet that environment. So for some sports, you can see how that would be an advantage, where maybe for gymnastics performers, where you're really focusing on close skills, highly dangerous skills that you need to perform accurately. You can see for other sports like swimming or track and field, where the crowd, can be a huge help in terms of doing better than what you thought you could do. So I think this time was all down to preparation, the psychological preparation going into the games to recognize that this was going to be the environment and training accordingly. So having said that, the fact that the athletes in Hong Kong were in a closed system environment, having to do their training for 174 days, mimicked exactly what it was like in the Olympic Village, because they weren't allowed out of that village either. So, all of that, I think, was helpful in terms of the psychological preparation as well.
Right, well, we're going to wrap it up now. Tricia, thanks so much for giving us that insight. We all rode that emotional roller coaster.
As did we.
And we were probably all, I know there were people sitting in the bar downstairs, tears rolling down their cheeks. And it's good to know that there is all of this sophistication behind it. But raw emotion definitely did help.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much. Give our very good wishes to everybody at the Sports Institute.
I certainly will.
All our medal winners and everybody else. Hope there'll be a few more medals in the Paralympics.
Yep.
Coming up in the next couple of days.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. We never let anybody leave the FCC empty-handed. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.